Okay, welcome to a very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or is it, as I like to say. I always prefer if you fine folks out there tell me what you want me to call this crazy city that I am living in right now, or for all my life for that matter. Now, today, as you may have heard, I'm going to deviate from what I've been covering a lot of lately, which is obviously paranormal. And specifically, I want to talk about economics, real estate, and other things that matter to not just us, but the entire globe. And personally, I think we might be in for a tech bubble, another housing bubble, and all that. But we'll go into that. And also, even though we're going to be talking about commercial real estate and my guests' experiences and deals, I will have a surprise as far as him being able to tell you about a paranormal experience that he had in his life. So, without further ado, let me introduce the one and only Mr. Martin Sawa. Martin, welcome to the show.
Well, hi, Dr. J, and thanks so much for having me on.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
really appreciate it and look forward to it.
The pleasure is all mine. Now, let me ask you this. What got you started in commercial real estate? And as in that question, when was the aha moment you had that decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
It was pretty specific. I got in late in life, so to speak. I was almost 30 years old. I was a city planner, and I was working the front desk of the planning department in San Jose, California. And a developer came in, and he was wearing more jewelry than probably what my annual salary was. And I just had a aha moment, and I decided this wasn't for me. My wife at the time, she had just delivered our newborn daughter, and I was dead broke. So I quit the job. I got a real estate sales license, and I got into commercial real estate and investment property sales as a broker. And then later, I reinvented myself several more times as an operator and finally as a developer. And this was all in San Francisco and Los Angeles.
Why commercial real estate as opposed to homes?
I evaluated becoming a residential broker, but I just wasn't wired for it. It was too right brain, and for me, there was emotional decisions made. In commercial, it was more, there was, investment logic, but it also became emotional. But frankly, it was because those were the biggest assets I could think of, and I thought it must mean there's going to be really big commissions.
And there obviously are, because the values that you're paying are a lot higher than homes, unless you're dealing with the exclusive elite of billionaires' mansions, right?
Yes, but it's also fees have gotten compressed. When you're dealing with properties valued at $100 million or pushing $1 billion, they're owned by pretty shrewd operators who aren't going to give commissions away needlessly. So they're heavily negotiated.
Now, the market you tapped into was San Francisco and the surrounding areas, right?
Yes, and also West Los Angeles.
Ah, okay. Well, let's start with San Francisco because, both areas are extraordinarily high cost of living and very, very valuable commercial and, private real estate. And I'm sure you can agree with this, that it's costs more so per square foot in the city of San Francisco than, say, downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah, I even think it's past Manhattan.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I'm not surprised. Now, so did you have a seed investment? Is it something you'd saved? What was your first real estate deal?
Well, this goes back again to when I just got my license and I was brokering small commercial properties in Oakland, which, as you know, is right across the bay from San Francisco.
Yes.
And most of my adult life, I lived in Oakland or adjoining cities and worked in San Francisco. I didn't find San Francisco a place I wanted to live 24 hours a day. So one of my first deals was to sell a vacant lot near Lake Merritt, the proceeds of which were used to build a small Buddhist temple in Oakland, Chinatown. And one of my early mentors was a Chinese Filipino woman who engineered all of this and helped get me started in my career.
Now, prior to being involved in real estate, among other things, you were also a door-to-door salesman, right?
Yes, I grew up in a small town in rural Wisconsin, and I was on the train bound for Chicago on the day of my high school graduation. And this was the summer of 1968, when there was a lot going on in Chicago in terms of the Democratic National Convention and riots and all kinds of things. So I needed money for college, and I worked as a fuller brush salesman. For those of your listeners who don't know what that is, it was one of the premier door-to-door sales companies back in the day, selling household products, hairbrushes, things like that. And again, I was fortunate to have a mentor who taught me how to sell. And what I learned about selling, I learned that summer. And later on, selling high-rise office buildings, it was a difference in degree, but not in kind. I used the same principles.
So, what lessons in your door-to-door, which, okay, I guess you did kind of answer it, but specifically, what was it about being a door-to-door salesman that carried over into commercial real estate and helped with your success?
Like any other form of sales, you have to develop trust and develop trust quickly with the client. In this case, it would typically be a housewife, and I did the northwest side of Chicago, which was kind of a middle-class, multi-ethnic neighborhood. And the mentor I had, the first thing he had me do was erase all the prices in the Fuller Brush catalog, the so-called suggested retail price. And I was taken aback. I said, how will I know how much to ask? And he said, see how bad they want it. So I learned that pricing is elastic.
Yeah.
Which was a big lesson because a lot of people I met in the business never got it. They didn't know how to price a building in terms of how it might be coveted by a certain group of buyers and so forth. So that's just one example.
Now, in 08, 09, literally the world went through a massive recession after the housing bubble burst, which affected every aspect of our economy in the United States, as well as I mentioned, essentially through the world. I think more so some nations in Western Europe than other places, but nonetheless, people definitely did feel the bite of this. Now, compared to the commercial real estate, how would you say, accordingly, how would you say it was affected versus the housing market? Maybe your percentages wise. Essentially, what I'm asking is, did the commercial real estate market get hit and lose the same volume of money compared to, say, the housing, or was it not quite correlated?
You're talking about back in 08, 09?
Yeah.
All sectors got hit because it was different from COVID, the cause, uh, the ostensible cause that led to it originated in the subprime mortgage market, in the housing market. So that took years to recover, and home prices, fell, and depending where you were in the country, and it took a while to recover. The commercial market, there was shenanigans in the mortgages and commercial real estate as well. And again, depending where you were, it took years to recover. So it was fundamentally a finance-driven problem, and affected both sectors.
Would you say the same or no? Because I would imagine commercial real estate does not really have subprime, or if they do, not as many as subprime loans that were signed when people were getting homes.
No, but it rippled through the global economy.
Yeah,
so for
exactly.
example, in New York, all the major financial firms.
Mm-hmm.
they
Lehman Brothers,
laid off
Bear
thousands
Stearns.
of people. And,
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, another important thing, which I mentioned to you earlier, which we right before we went on, is I've always been, of course, people who know me, I know my history, before law school, which obviously led me this path instead of being in courtrooms. I've always been involved in business one way or another, but it had been taught to me by my immigrant family, being the firstborn in this country, that the true value of something that you can rely on is real estate. And you came back with something which is a no-brainer, but very important for people to know, that there's no creating more outside of what they're trying to do in the Indian Ocean, South China Sea, by creating artificial land and islands. But for the most part, you don't really see commercial real estate freeing up and then all of a sudden tanking, because someone's always owns it, and there's always going to be a willing buyer for the next. So as far as investments, would you rank this among the safest investments you can make, as opposed to, say, in gold or in stocks, or even, the housing market?
Real estate was traditionally a local market, but in the 1980s, when there was an explosion of development, it caught the attention of major institutional investors like pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds. And so money was plowed into commercial real estate, and it became a legitimate investment asset class like stocks and bonds. And today it's probably a $16 trillion market. So that part is important, because there's so much money that's, like today, on the sidelines waiting to invest, that it can sway the direction of a market, even if the real estate fundamentals, like because of COVID, are temporarily weakened. So it's become a big deal.
Let me ask you this, because you're mentioning the C19 term, which I hate to say the full term because of being flagged. Would you say that we are in an economic bubble that's getting ready to burst? Because things don't sort of match up to me. For instance, you see the stock market still rising when you have massive unemployment, not just in the States, but globally. Surprisingly, I've noticed even the homes in multiple areas have gone up, aside from places where the land value went down because of excessive homelessness and things like that. In the past, of people that are studying indicators of what led to, say, the Great Depression, or I think it was Black Tuesday in '87, again in '08, '09, I'm starting to pay attention to what other people involved, and of course what my passion, micro and macroeconomics, and I'm starting to see trends that personally lead me that we are in a bubble and it's going to burst, and it will affect commercial real estate, how homes, private real estate, Bitcoin, the stock market, and even more. And I fear that, sure, 2008, 2009 were not forced to be in a shutdown economy. It was other circumstances that led to that. But I still see that we are heading to that direction. Now, in your opinion, being involved in business for so long and being successful in commercial real estate, do you think that is something for all of us to be worried about?
Well, sure, you need to always know what your downside risk might be. But I think let's say the performance of the stock market in 2020 surprised everybody. I mean, it was a V-shaped recovery. And by September, October, the major indices had reached their pre-COVID levels. And the market was basically, which looks forward, it's a discounting mechanism 6 months or more out, was just wrote off the pandemic as sort of a natural disaster and never looked back. Now, commercial real estate doesn't work like the stock market. You can buy real estate investment trust, you can buy stock in these individual companies, and that's sort of a marker for the market. But it's a much more slow-moving activity. That's why you haven't even seen kind of the bottom or the repricing of rents or any of that. It's going to take some time. But in the residential market here in the Bay Area, there was no decline. There was a period of no activity, and now prices are going crazy, much higher than they were pre-COVID.
Yeah, and that's what is something that I've been wondering about. So you have prices going up. It looks to possibly be, if that $15 an hour does happen at some point, well, clearly you're just going to have inflation. So again, another possible trigger that would lead us down the path. Because even in microeconomics, that sector obviously can have an effect on some other market, and hence the entire economy, or aka macroeconomics, affects everything. And again, that is just something that is worrying me. Now, compared to other states, what would you say to people that want to get involved in real estate, the challenges and the benefits of doing commercial real estate in California versus, say, Arizona or New Mexico?
It's a tough, competitive business wherever you go, and my experience has always been as an entrepreneur. When I was a broker, I always worked for commissions. And when I was an operator and developer, then you really put skin in the game. You put money in the deal, you put time, you risk your reputation. So from that perspective, if you don't have kind of the entrepreneurial mindset, then you probably don't want to get involved in commercial real estate like I did, where everything is at risk, where you're a broker working purely on commission. There's many other ways. You can work for a property management company and be paid a salary. You can work for a pension fund and be an acquisition officer and so forth. But in an entrepreneurial sense, the major factor that determine your success is your ability to quote a Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times and get up 8.
I like that. I'm actually going to use that because there's a Greek proverb. It's not about falling more than once, but essentially you fall down, get up and dust yourself off, which is something a lot of people don't do. And I learned quickly in law school, it didn't even take more than a few weeks, that this country, and I would possibly say the Western world, for that matter, is very sue happy. Where people fall, someone's going to get sued as opposed to getting off and dusting yourself. So I think that it's important that we do remember that, because things weren't always this way as far as litigation happy, and they may not always be that way down the line. Now, let's go talk about some specific deals that you were involved in that were both great and other ones that didn't go so well, but you learned from.
And I would have to think hard, but I'm sure there was one where the biggest risk, at least years ago, for a broker was getting paid. Well, there were two risks. One was working for months on a deal and not having it close, because until it closes, you don't get paid.
That's right. Because you're on commission, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And it has to stay, anyway, regardless, if it doesn't close, you just lost your time and effort.
Yeah, and the other, and perhaps even worse, is you close the deal, but then the party obligated to pay your commission decides not to pay you. And related to my experience as a forward brush salesman when I was 18, my mentor, one time we basically sold the forward brush product, and they would give us the merchandise. Then we would have to go and collect and pay back the house. So one time I had a lady sweet talk me out of canceling the order, and my mentor, Irv, went crazy. He said, "We're not in the business of selling." He said, "We're in the business of selling and collecting." And those words stuck with me forever. So there may have been a case when I first started out where I was screwed out of a commission, and that would be my worst experience.
I'm glad you brought up mentors, because I was going to ask about that, and also at the same time ask about the paranormal experience, which I know people in my audience would absolutely love to hear about. So before I ask you about the paranormal experience, and I want you to give a background of your, your family life, the wife that passed away. I don't want to give too much with that until you tell that story, but should we start with that, or do you want to mention some other mentors that helped you along this commercial real estate path?
Yeah, there was one particular one. By now, I had graduated from selling small properties in Oakland to affiliating with one of the large international companies in San Francisco. And I was going from selling deals worth $1 million, $2 million to deals worth $10 to $50 million, and which was a big leap. So I was fortunate again to have a mentor who took an interest in me, and he's the smartest guy I ever met in terms of retail properties. He was a developer who built shopping centers and then got over leveraged, lost everything, and then came back in as a broker and later became a lender. And he knew everything, but he needed somebody to find the deals for him. So he would, at the time we were in San Francisco, but he had a client requirement to buy shopping centers in Los Angeles. And instead of going and trying to get a listing, he would send me down there to find out everything I could about the property without the seller knowing. And I'd go to City
Reconnaissance,
Hall and
essentially.
get copies of the building plans. I would surreptitiously interview tenants to find out the kind of rents they were paying. I'd take property managers to lunch to find out about expenses, and I'd put a package together, and he would present it to the buyer, and the buyer would make an offer. And so we'd fly down to Los Angeles to present it. And the Sawa at first was furious that we would be peddling his center without his permission. But then eventually would counter at a ridiculous number, and we'd have a deal in escrow. So that's not your traditional brokerage trajectory. But again, I learned a lot from this mentor.
Now, let's talk about the paranormal experience, but for people to understand that, they need to know the trials and tribulations you've had with your wife. And you were married more than once. So I'm just going to back out and let you basically tell the story from the beginning about, your wife, your relationship, what happened to her, and then ultimately the experience.
I moved to California in 1973 and then married for the first time in 1977. And this was, again, I was living in Oakland, California, which was kind of a racial smorgasbord. The black population was just about to exceed the white population. There was always a large Chinese presence in Oakland, Chinatown. There were Vietnamese refugees coming after the war. There was immigrants from Mexico. So, and it was there was 3 sports teams, and they all won world titles during that decade. So there was kind of a lot going on. My first wife, she was Native American, and we married, but then divorced in the mid '80s. And then I dated for years, and then I met my second wife, and this was in 1991. And she was a black woman from the rural South who, like myself, as fresh out of high school, got on the bus, went to California, never looked back, and did what she had to do. After we were married, I discovered that she had abilities in what I call the world of the unseen. And these experiences, I was a hardened business person and a skeptic about all of this, but you have to, if you're open to evidence, you can't deny your visceral experience in getting at the truth. And then, so there was that, and she eventually became not only wife and lover, but my spiritual mentor and moral compass. There was just a lot of ups and downs. And then we were living in Los Angeles. This is around 1997. And something inspired me to go see a psychic. I never had any contact, didn't even do the palm readings by the beach. And I had to drag my wife because she was religious. She read the Bible every night, and the Bible doesn't speak kindly of psychics. But we went, and it was a transformative experience. And I tried to debunk it later and kept coming back, and eventually this psychic, her name was Mary Jo, and we became friends, and she would do readings for me once or twice a year. And I came to rely on her as being a valuable source of information through unexplainable means, but nonetheless real for me. In 2002, my wife dropped dead one night. And that was, to this day, I can't describe the experience. In the book, I mean, I try to, but it doesn't do it justice. And that changed my life. And in terms of recovering, it took me a while. The psychic was instrumental in having me deal with the grief and eventually getting back on my feet. And that was because she was able to connect me with my second wife and allow me to see that a relationship can survive physical death. And that's kind of the story.
There's a super chat I got from Pyramid 7. Pyramid, thank you so much for supporting and, of course, for being here. And also, and I want to thank, of course, Rockstar 2, my two moderators and great friends who I also, for those of you who don't know, I'm basically outing my friends here, Rock and specifically Pyramid, because I do speak to them outside of streams. So I just want to thank you both for not only being here, but for also other things you guys share with me and hear from me outside of this. Now, Martin, the word or the term "skin in the game" that is something that, you hear from essentially everybody. You watch Shark Tank, you hear about Mr. Wonderful and got to have some skin in the game. Otherwise, it's not worth it for him, especially when someone offers a 5% stake in that. Now, a central theme of your book, which is called The Other Side of Business, Money and Meaning in the Golden State, your memoir, you mentioned about putting skin in the game. What does that mean specifically for you?
Well, in light of hindsight, it was one of the central themes of the book, and not only applied just to my to commercial real estate in my professional career, but to most other aspects of life as well. And it means taking risks. It can mean investing time, money, reputation. At a personal level, it can mean putting yourself in a situation where there's great reward, but also the ability to deal with the downside. And I relied on my direct visceral experience, whether it's studying the paranormal or taking a shot and becoming a broker on commissions and waiting a year till I made any money and what I had to do during that time. But in achieving success, the more risk you take, the greater is the opportunity. So that's, in anything I look at, if I'm dealing with someone, I try to see how much skin in the game they have. And if they don't have much and they're pontificating on this or that, then I take what they say with a grain of salt.
I just got a comment here. I'm gonna read it out loud. And essentially, it's from Rockstar. It says, sometimes the first pancake isn't the best one, which I think is a great to describe circumstances. So I just wanted to share that with everyone out there, unless they're also paying attention to the chat. Now, I want to ask you some general questions, which I guess I could have started with that instead of specific questions about you and your life. But going back to why are you telling the story now, first of all? At what point is something going on that you realized, let's put the pen to the paper? Was it because of the lockdowns, people being home and having more time to write? Are you exiting real estate or retiring? Or why now, out of curiosity?
In 2013, I basically dropped out of the business. Mm-hmm. At least for a while. I took a time out, which is now approaching 8 years. And I, just to pursue other things that I wanted to pursue, that I didn't have time when I was doing the business. So I started to write, and I wrote a few screenplays, and I wrote some essays, and I took classes. This was from UCLA and with private screenwriter who conducted group classes. And I was working with a developmental editor, and she said, "Did you ever think of writing a memoir?" And I said, no, because I just regarded that as kind of like a vanity project. And she said, "You have some interesting stories and some characters and experiences, and they say, write what you know." So I thought about it. And the toughest decision at that point was not, can I write 85,000 words that mean something? It was, how honest do I want to be? And just writing a business bio, you have a pretty one-dimensional character. It's a man or a woman who, made $1 billion or whatever, but they encountered obstacles along the way, but you never get to meet them as in terms of what their personal life was like and the interaction and what they were as a real person. And so I said, I can be, if I have to be truthful, then I'm either all in or not in at all. And I made that decision, and so the other side of success is not just the business bio, but it's a pretty raw accounting of my personal life and relationships. And then I started, and it took me 3 years to write it, and then published it in September of last year. So that's the long version.
Now, this is a subjective question. Lots of people talk about the American dream, and to many people, it's different. Of course, there's a large group of people where it's essentially the same if you speak broadly, and if even more so, within our state of California, there is the California dream. What does that mean to you as Martin Sawa, as opposed to, what would be read in, say, the Urban Dictionary or anything else like maybe Wikipedia? So your personal definition of it, and did you achieve that?
The California dream, in my mind, was just kind of an accelerated or version of the American dream on steroids. My parents were immigrants from Ukraine. They arrived penniless in America, and the worst imaginable conditions they could conceive here were better than the best imaginable they left behind. And the American dream is, if with hard work and a little luck, you can achieve success. You're not guaranteed it. But you're given the opportunity. And if you take that opportunity and seize it, then the world's your oyster. And that's why I moved to California from the I grew up in this little town, and I just felt like many people that I could achieve this in California. And I did. It didn't come out quite as I anticipated, because the dream is, at the end of the day, most people think of it in material terms and financial success, but it was overcoming challenges, and with some were more worthy than others, and raising the stakes, and that was the dream for me. And I think my parents didn't understand what I was doing a lot of the time, but I think I hopefully fulfilled it for them, because for most immigrants, the dream is that the child will do better and be better than the parent. And in my case, with my daughter and stepchildren, that's certainly happened. So
now, let me hold on. I actually wrote something here. I wanted to. Oh, this is it. Okay, you've heard me earlier mention that the huge influx of homeless people has affected the prices of real estate, both commercial and private, and it's only grown drastically in our state because there's a lot of incentives for homeless people to come. People will get food stamps, welfare, Medi-Cal, and the weather's great. So, and if you notice lately, there are tent cities popping up on main intersections because of a new law where essentially LAPD, and this may very well be the entire state. Police cannot go to homeless people, whether they be smoking crack or shooting heroin inside their little tent. They're not allowed to go. And instead of asking them to move or arresting them for trespassing or loitering, I noticed that the city has been bringing in porta potties and porta showers. Essentially, it's for them to live. Now, obviously, part of this has to be because of the shutdown and people who lost their small businesses. But in general, when comparing private real estate or homes versus commercial real estate, in your opinion, how does homelessness affect either of those or versus those?
Well, it's a tremendous problem, certainly here in the Bay Area and obviously in Los Angeles as well. It's part of a larger problem. And I don't want to digress too far, but if you recall, in 5-6 years ago, Prop 47 passed.
I remember that, but I don't remember what that proposition was. I know AB 47 was for prisons, but that's not 47.
Yeah, it's important. It was called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, but it had nothing to do with safety or neighborhoods or schools. Quite the opposite. It reduced certain felonies to misdemeanors.
Oh.
It was basically a decriminalization, which, if you don't like the crime statistics, you just reclassify what's a crime. This had a tremendous effect statewide. And in San Francisco, property crimes shot up where it's now among the highest in the nation. And so the homelessness, which I think is a misnomer. Homeless connotes a real estate problem. And this isn't a real estate problem. It's a problem of unsupervised encampments.
Yes.
With people who are mentally ill, who have addiction problems.
Or PTSD, a lot of vets.
Or criminally inclined, or a woman and her child. Mm-hmm. And all these people are thrown together in these unsupervised encampments, and crime reigns. And the people who live next to them, I'm sure you've read the stories in Hollywood and all of that. So it's a tremendous problem in terms of commercial real estate. It affects it at every level. It affects the small shop owner who gets broken into, or people just take stuff out with impunity. It affects tourists and who's get carjacked or all of this. It affects office workers when they just have to deal. And in San Francisco, it used to be concentrated in the Tenderloin. Mm-hmm. And we had a major development project to revitalize. We're right on the edge of the Tenderloin, so I know this pretty well. But now it's sort of spread throughout the whole city. It's just a tremendous problem, and it's a politically induced problem. Mm-hmm. And until the people, the voters, decide and enough is enough, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I agree, specifically in Los Angeles with our new district attorney, which they already want him to recall, but there's a law where he has to be in his office for 90 days, and that's why that hasn't even started. But he's essentially trying to circumvent our legislature by, creating his own sort of sentencing guidelines. And the biggest thing is, of course, the no bail, which is statewide now. And, of course, that, breeds criminal behavior, because if someone gets arrested for carjacking and is immediately released and said, hey, come back in 2 years for your trial, well, if I was a criminal, knowing I'm going to serve life in prison for second-degree murder and I'm in a gang, wouldn't you just go out and commit 6 more? I know that's happened in this state and New York, and And sadly, a lot of the homeless people are victims of these homicides. If you recall, there were some really mean people years ago who would literally go around filming, I believe they were teens, filming them beating up homeless people. A lot of them were sleeping and they just woke them up. So it's really sad. But would you say that homeless encampments, unsupervised homeless encampments full of crime around commercial real estate properties affect that value more so than, say, neighborhoods, affecting that people's homes values?
I would put them kind of as comparable. It's so hard to describe to people who don't live or experience or really understand how this works at kind of a human level. And by the way, there is a recall petition for the new DA in San Francisco.
Ah, him too. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, well, it's finally maybe people are starting to say enough is enough. It's not the homelessness sort of makes it seem like you're not compassionate if you don't agree with whatever this political jurisdiction decides to allow. But it's a misplaced compassion if it's that at all. This is a political, ideological objective, and it's very scary.
I got a couple more questions for you. Let's see what I wrote down because I want to ask them in the order. First, because your book is not just a how-to guide, it's your memoir. It covers a lot of things, including your experience with your wife. Your interracial relationships. The fact that you were an immigrant, and a lot of those details. So there are life, I guess you could say, life lessons throughout in the book. So what other life advice would you give people in today's world, or any, that you want to tell people? Because we're living in a very, very different time, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that, unless it's someone who is maybe 15, maybe under 20, and has never seen a different time like we are in today.
A good friend of mine, he's familiar with politics, is active on the Beltway, and he said to have a conversation, it's so polarized. He said to have a conversation, you need two things. One, you need factual agreement on what is true. And the second is you need mutual respect between the two people. And given that, it's very difficult to even have a conversation almost about anything. Because what you see on TV, on the internet, these images, visual and audio images that are pumped into your brain 24/7. And believe me, the major media companies, the major tech companies spend billions working with psychologists to know how to manipulate human behavior. And people believe what they see on these images to be true. And it's getting worse. Just relating it to real estate, in commercial real estate for office buildings. In the 20th century, these were buildings built for tenants in what they called the FIRE, F-I-R-E, industries, which you've probably heard: finance, insurance, real estate, and also include legal and accounting, etc. But in the 21st century, the dominant tenants who are driving the market are what they now call TAMI tenants, T-A-M-I. This is technology, advertising, media, and information.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this coalescing of these industries now delivering one message, which you don't know, where there's a blurring between what's fiction and nonfiction. I've talked to a friend of mine who was a former editor of a major U.S. newspaper, and he said there is no more reportage. All the old guys have been pushed out, and now it's just op-ed. It's just delivering the message. So this is pretty scary.
You've been involved in real estate, commercial real estate, and working extremely hard for literally 5 decades, 50 years. And after you sold your last deal in San Francisco, you mentioned in the book that now is the time to live. Why did you wait until your retirement years to really live your life?
Part of it was we had these major projects underway, and when you're an entrepreneur, you have to work 110 or 120%. It's not like a 9-to-5 job. So part of it was just the sheer application of time, because if you work half as hard, you don't make half as much, you make nothing. Part of it was the juice, what I called the juice, and that was the action and excitement of closing or developing major deals and dealing and outwitting your opponents at the highest levels. And then part of it, it took me that long after my second wife passed to kind of get back on the spiritual path and reestablish my religious practice. And those all came together, and then that's when I decided to just get out of the business and do things that had more meaning for my life.
This is the final question I'm going to ask you. When you're on your deathbed, what's more important to you? How financially successful you were, which many people would describe that as being the most important, or what type of man you were and the life you lived, which is something that I would, think is more important to me and have been thinking of such.
Obviously, for me, it's what kind of man I was, but the real question or issue is what happens next.
Yeah, that's right.
If you believe life starts at zero and ends at zero, then that's it. If you believe there's more to life than meets the eye, and that your soul personality, or whatever it is that you survives physical death, then you have to prepare for what's to come. And that's the big question.
Is there any other topic you briefly want to cover this interview before we wrap up? And I will ask you for one final statement after I make a couple announcements. So if there's any other comment or if there's anything else you want to touch on in the short time we have today, because, like I told you earlier, we will do this again down the line. But if there's anything else that you think is relevant to what we've been talking about that I didn't bring up or you didn't bring up, feel free.
Well, just on the subject of mentorship, I've done mentorship myself, both at a business level and at a personal level. And what I try to find out from the mentee is what does he or she believe to be true? And then who do they admire? And then to look at their life. And if they like what they see, then we move ahead. And if they don't, then they have to change what they need to. So that would be my last piece of advice.
Okay, let me say a couple things. As I mentioned earlier, today I deviated from what I meant to cover, which is because of the countdown to disclosure and the documentary that just came out with Third Phase of the Moon, that if you all seen it, then you'll notice my interview with Michio Kaku is partly in there. The point is I've been covering a lot of the paranormal topics because of the time, and not to mention that is what I started, and of course my base audience is into that. But as you all know, I've covered lots of topics, politics. I've had interviews with, mob. Well, not bosses, but the capo from the Colombo crime family, Michael Francese, or Sammy the Bull Gravano's daughter, or John and Jimmy Alight, two enforcers for the Gambino crime family, and of course other things that interest me, including science, astronomy, and of course business. So that's why I made time today to fit this remarkable guest in. And he does have a remarkable book, which I will give him a time to talk about where to get that. As you all know, I normally never talk about upcoming guests because things happen. I've been using the Graham Hancock, for a while because he did had to cancel a couple times last minute, one time being an hour before. So if I'd said that to you, I would have gotten a lot of heat. And same thing with Michio Kaku, and the list goes on and on. For instance, if you knew from me that Billy Carson was going to be on last week, and then he had a problem with his daughter and canceled right before I was supposed to start, you probably wouldn't have been the happiest. So today I'm going to break that, and I hope I don't curse myself because tomorrow I am having Billy Carson. So if something goes wrong, and it doesn't happen, just forgive me. And that's why I'm giving you this one little insight into tomorrow. So he is an ancient alien star, can talk about Solar Warden, secret space program, which essentially is Solar Warden consciousness, and of course other things. So I want everybody out there paying attention to this and who hears this later to keep that in mind if you want to be part of the live show. And also, pay attention because my sites, and it is multiple sites, my new site is still being revamped. And also, I am having my old site that you all know for years is going to be placed on an old domain. I'm also going to make an announcement today that I've been hearing from a lot of friends that I need, because of my love with politics, that I should start a channel specifically for that. So that will be coming soon, but don't worry, this channel will remain as is. If anything, I probably won't do the political interviews on this anymore and move them to the other channel dedicated to that. So you'll see more paranormal on this, and of course other things that I like to cover. So those are the main things I wanted to let you all know. And one other thing that I've had a chance to ask my dear friend Rockstar, who can't do it, but if there's anybody living in the Los Angeles area, and this is the wrong place for me to say because there's people around the world that are going to be hearing this, but I am being cast for a game show called America Says, and the audition is Saturday. If anybody wants to go, I need one more team member, and you live in the Los Angeles area, please get a hold of me no later than tomorrow. Otherwise, I will find that last person. So those are essentially what I wanted to tell you all. And of course, I do want to thank everybody. Of course, I want to thank Pyramid 7. Thank you so much for your support. It's people like you who are keeping this alive. And Rockstar, thank you for also your support and being a friend. And more importantly, because I was wondering, did something happen with the comments until Rockstar was there? I was like, my friends are here and others are here. Also, Mr. Logan, Cameron Logan. No, I did not pass away, and it's a good thing you asked that because there were some dire times for a couple years, and as you can tell, no, I am still here, which is a good thing for most people. I don't know very many that would say it's a bad thing, but like I said, pay attention to tomorrow. Make sure you hit subscribe. Please leave a comment. Hit the thumbs up, because if you do not, the algorithm will will affect the analytics and bury these interviews so far in the back that they will not be recommended. So it's really important you do so. And the fourth thing you can do is share them. All four of these things make a drastic difference. And when you subscribe, please make sure you hit all notifications. Reason being is when I'm using OBS or Open Broadcasting System, unless it's software. The point is it no longer allows me to schedule a time, which is what I used to do. So that is why no one knows when I'm going live until I actually hit live. I'm going to be dealing with Goof On tomorrow prior to Billy Carson, knock on wood, assuming that doesn't change on his behalf, to try to see what other options I can have. But I want you all to, for the time being, make sure you have the notifications hit. Now, I believe I covered all the questions in the chat. Cameron Logan, I'm not quite seeing if that's a question I could ask him. I think that was a question you asked directly to me, and I hope I was able to answer it. So aside from those announcements that I had you all bear with me to make, I'm going to turn it back to my guest. Martin, let's talk about your book, where people can find it, and where people can find you, and what else do you do? Do you speak at lectures, or do you hold seminars, webinars, or was this your memoir, you wrote it, and are just making the rounds in media to talk about your book and your life?
The book, Dr. J, can be purchased online. The easiest thing is to just go to my website, www.martinsawa, martinsawa.com, and it's available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or a number of online booksellers in whatever format you like, ebook, paperback, hardcover. Or you can go directly to Amazon or another bookseller and just put in my name or the title, and it'll pop up, and it's a click away. So
now, the final thing I want to ask you as we go, if you have a final statement to make to everyone, whether it be about what you talked about, another piece of life advice, or whatever you want to say, what would it be?
Well, if you're going to go on America Says, Dr. J, be careful not to speak out of turn, because you'll lose 5 seconds.
Thank you for saying that, because I was, before the audition, they did send me a link to watch an episode, and I noticed that someone did not speak in that order, so I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to have to school my teammates before the audition, because from what I know from the audition, aside from asking personal questions, the second half of the audition is literally going to put us in a round or two of a mock session. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Everybody who's joined today in the chat and in this stream, thanks again for being here. Like I said, I have something scheduled for tomorrow. And also, I did hear, I believe it was Rockstar told me this, to book John Lear. As you know, I've been having John Lear on the show for 8 years. He first wanted me to call him after January 6th, and then after inauguration, then after March 4th, and now he wants me to wait till after March 21st or 24th. Those dates may mean something to some of you. I don't want to break his heart by telling him what he's hoping is going to happen won't. So bear with him until he's ready to speak. A lot of people thought when Jim Goodall was on that it was in fact John Lear, which it wasn't. So, with that being said, catch me tomorrow, same time, same place. And this is Dr. J along with the great Martin Sawa, and we are signing off.